For a TV show all about time and space, it's to be expected that Doctor Who would occasionally play with time itself, telling stories of alternate timelines, paradoxes, and general timey-wimey stuff. One of the most prominent of these is the Series 6 episode The Girl Who Waited, which strands companion Amy Pond in an accelerated time stream on a quarantined alien planet, with the Doctor and Rory encountering an older and bitter version of their fellow time traveller and facing a dilemma of which Amy to save. The Girl Who Waited is one of the most acclaimed episodes of Doctor Who Series 6, finding itself nominated for a Hugo Award and garnering widespread critical praise. But after 11 years, does it still stand the test of time and deserve its glowing reputation? Well, grab your closest giant magnifying glass and sign this piece of paper forcing you to donate to my Patreon if I make any topical jokes about pandemics, because it's time to take a deep dive into The Girl Who Waited.
Yeah, give me a minute and your cutest smile. That's the one.
One of the best parts about the trio of the Doctor and the Ponds is the comedy and close relationship. This is present immediately in The Girl Who Waited as the Doctor promises to take them to the beautiful planet Appalachia. Scenes like this show the value of the trio's dynamic, because there's nothing else like it in the show, with all this witty banter between good friends. It's one of those snippets of the day-to-day lives of the main companions, just hanging around in the TARDIS trying to find somewhere to go for a short break or a holiday.
Why couldn't we go to number 1?
It's hideous! Everyone goes to number 1, planet of the coffee shops.
And because the human race has become obsessed with holiday snaps, Amy makes the genius decision to return to the TARDIS for her phone, which results in her immediately getting separated from the Doctor and Rory. Great job, Amy. Real big brain strat there. I also find it so bizarre that when faced with two buttons and being told to simply press the button, Amy doesn't think to ask which one. This entire episode could have been completely avoided if she had simply asked for clarification. Indeed, she presses the wrong one, becoming trapped in a different time stream with only a giant magnifying glass screen thing linking the two. There's some nice chaos as Rory tries to survive a handbot, and the Doctor re-establishes the video call only to find out that Amy has had to wait a week for him to do so. This is very similar to the Doctor's wife, where House trapped Amy and Rory in the TARDIS, forcing the latter to wait ever increasing amounts of time for his wife to return. It's a brilliant sci-fi concept, and this episode essentially turns that into an entire narrative on its own. The reason for Amy being stranded is a clever one. It turns out that Appalachia has been infected with a brutal plague that kills two-hearted beings in a single day. They're about 9 years too early with that one, weren't they? Alright, now subscribe to my Patreon. Since this episode was double banked with closing time, this is the perfect way to write the Doctor out of the story. It means he physically cannot interact with the wider narrative, otherwise he'd instantly catch the disease and die. It's a clever way to minimise his involvement to focus on the exploration of Amy and Rory's relationship. And because the whole planet is under quarantine, subscribe to my Patreon, the protagonists instead arrive in a featureless white building. This is mainly because the episode was filmed on a lower budget than the rest of Series 6, but Tom McRae's choice for all white sets is inspired. It creates a very sanitised feeling that perfectly communicates the nature of these kindness facilities as quarantine zones. It has all the same clean whiteness and blandness of human hospitals, so it's recognisable to the viewer, especially because the same foyer of the Millennium Centre is used in New Earth as, you guessed it, a hospital. However, the facility also has different entertainment zones accessible through magic doorways.
Go in that door, out random,
This does a good job of expanding the scope of the story, making the narrative feel bigger than it is, and working well at showing how expansive the facility is, with gardens and factory areas changing things up. The key feature of the kindness facility is that it contains two different time streams, with time in the Red Waterfall timeline compressed to allow the dying Appalachian to live their whole life within their final 24 hours, instead of being on their deathbed like anyone else would be. This creates a moral dilemma about how people should spend their final days, but it also leads to a slick and Doctor Who-y style storyline of timey-wimey paradoxical goodness, especially because the time stream issue can't simply be resolved by Rory just walking out of the Green Anchor room and back into the Red Waterfall room, which is a brilliant wrinkle to the story. It's very similar to Girl in the Fireplace, time running differently in the two settings, with the Doctor and Rory arriving 36 years too late to save Amy. Showrunner Stephen Moffat loved using the idea of people waiting for the Doctor to come back for them, something that had even happened to Amy herself before in the 11th hour. Even though Moffat himself didn't write The Girl Who Waited, this aspect is still the core focus of the episode. The difference in time and the TARDIS's usual pinpoint accuracy leads to Rory being accosted by a much older Amy who is almost unrecognisable as a result. The aging makeup used is superb. They didn't go overboard making her some old wrinkly hag with a walking stick. She instead remains firmly recognisable as Amy Pond, simply aged up a few decades as she probably would naturally look. So I can't wait for the comparisons to how Karen Gillan actually looks in the year 2047. I do wish there had been a bit of greyness or thinness in her hair since she's around 58 years old, but the effect still works well. Initially the production team planned on using an entirely different actor for the older Amy, but Gillan pushed for herself to assume the role, and this was the perfect choice, because it allows the viewer to sympathise with Amy even more and understand the ramifications of her abandonment and newfound lifestyle. Amy hasn't just been sitting around riding roller coasters for the last 36 years. She's had to survive the hard way. The robotic staff of the kindness facility don't understand that she is human, so they're constantly pursuing her to cure her of her unregistered bacteria. Oh, and that's another Doctor episode where the robots just don't understand what they're doing. I'm mixed on the handbots. On one hand, they're designed very well with a creepy look, especially when they whip out the face needles, so they serve as a good threat looming over Amy and forcing her into this life of desperation. However, they also feel a bit contrived, generic, and just generally one of the weaker parts of the narrative, since they're just there for the sake of being a villain, and they're entirely unoriginal. I do like how they're almost reverse zombies, trying to cure rather than infect, and they can just teleport in randomly, so they're a suitable vessel to establish Amy's need to become a hardened survivor and a skilled warrior, since she has had to find a way to evade them for 36 years while waiting for rescue. It's eye-opening to see how different she is, complete with weapons showing how she's learned to combat the handbots and hide under the radar. It's a bit weird how she's able to rumble up her own sonic screwdriver because it's inconsistent with her technical abilities, but we've seen other people possess sonic devices and she has had 36 years to work it all out, so it's emblematic of her change as a person and the lengths she has had to go to survive. Indeed, the main change in Amy is her personality and outlook on life. She has had nothing but the building's AI for company and the onslaught of handbots, which has turned her into this warrior with technical know-how clad in the skin of her enemies. Much like Rory in The Doctor's Wife, her hopes of rescue have long been extinguished, and instead replaced by deep resentment for the Doctor and even a bitterness towards Rory, because she blames them for not rescuing her and instead condemning her to live this life. She feels betrayed, and 36 years of isolation would naturally cause you to turn against the person who brought you here.
I hate him. I hate the Doctor. I hate him more than I've ever hated anyone in my life.
The Girl Who Waited challenges Amy's relationship with the Doctor. It's not his and Rory's fault that they were late, but it's understandable that Amy would change after so many years of solitude. The Doctor promised he would rescue her, but there's only so long that hope can last. Even being reunited with Rory isn't enough to dig her out of her resentment, because this is simply who she is now, and Rory is a living reminder of exactly how long she has been trapped here. She also remembers all too well the first time she was left to wait for the Doctor, and then the second time almost immediately after his return. This has been the third time she has had to wait years for him to return for her as he promised. So this instance is the straw that breaks the camel's back, because of how long it's been. She genuinely hates the Doctor now, and rejects his very existence. She refuses to even call her sonic probe a screwdriver, because that would be another reminder of the Doctor. She's had all the childhood whimsy and magic of TARDIS travel slowly beaten out of her over the course of nearly 4 decades. She has had all that time to reflect upon the Doctor's personality and reckless lifestyle, growing to absolutely despise it. The Doctor flies through time and space all happy-go-lucky, getting into scrapes and laughing in the face of evil. But Amy doesn't have that luxury anymore. She has lost any kind of nostalgia of her old adventuring lifestyle because it's linked to the Doctor, who she detests. It's a brilliant way to explore the relationship between Doctor and companion, really pushing the envelope and offering a completely different perspective on the whole thing, showing how the companions' trust can be broken and they can essentially turn on the Doctor due to all the horrors of the universe. A narrative like The Girl Who Waited works perfectly because the companions are married. We get to see Rory's reaction to his wife becoming this completely different person, with Amy essentially having to learn to love him again, leading to some nice jokes between the pair as they try to reconcile. It challenges their relationship and the dynamic we have come to love. And one of the best lines in the episode is this:
"I don't care that you got old. I care that we didn't grow old together."
Rory blames himself for what happened, and this leads to him lashing out at the Doctor as a result, calling him out on his carelessness since he didn't want to do a simple check to see whether or not the planet was dangerous. He got them into this nightmare, and now Rory is being forced to choose between the Amy he knew and the Amy he promised to protect. It's an absolutely fantastic scene, and Rory is completely in the right here. He promised to protect Amy for the rest of their lives, something he has already done time and time again. She's his wife and they made vows to protect each other, but now he's being placed in this impossible position, which has been the result of a domino effect starting with the Doctor's decision to travel to Appalachia.
That is not how I travel.
Then I do not want to travel with you!
It shows his backbone and loyalty to Amy. It's empirically the Doctor's fault and it's left up to Rory and Amy to work out what to do. Okay, so one of my biggest criticisms of this episode is all the talking. There's a lot of technobabble and exposition. The episode regularly explaining the constantly changing rules of the time streams and temporal engines, which gets quite messy at points. The episode occasionally dips into style over substance territory, because the explanations for certain elements don't really make a whole lot of sense, so you end up just kind of nodding your head along with it so you don't get left behind by questioning too much. The timeline concept is brilliant, with so much potential, but it doesn't really get used as well as it could here, which is ironic, because it instead feels a bit stretched thin, not really working as the main narrative for a 45-minute episode, since it doesn't go as deep into the concepts as it could have gone. It never quite makes sense how everything happens the way it does, but the episode expects you to understand it all, which can get into some slippery Big Bang territory, but the human element of the story remains the focus and works well, despite all the talking and technobabble ramblings. Since there are some giant, vaguely explained temporal engines managing the different time streams, the Doctor works out a very confusing solution to mess around with them and fix everything to bring Amy back into the right timeline somehow. This creates another excellent moral dilemma. If the plan succeeds, the past Amy is saved, but this older Amy ceases to exist because the events creating her never happened. I love that this becomes the central conflict. The older Amy is still Amy. She has all the memories and experiences of the younger version. She physically exists and she would die if that timeline was prevented. Sure, she's bitter and hates that she had to experience this life, but she also knows that she would be dying. It's not like her consciousness would magically be transported back. She would be replaced, and this version would literally factually die. All those 36 years of surviving, making do and mending, learning to fight, that would all be for nothing. It's a fascinating dilemma. Kill someone to save them. But the cherry on top is the potential solution of the Doctor taking the older Amy with him. Because if they do that, then the young Amy will be forced into that timeline. She would have to suffer through those 36 years of pain and loneliness because she has to become the Amy who gets saved. Either way, one of the Amys suffers as a result of the decision.
So I have to choose.
It brings up a fascinating ethical debate, because the younger Amy would have all her agency taken away from her. She doesn't get a say in any of this. She can't choose what the Doctor and Rory will do, but she's the one with the most to lose, and I find that deeply chilling and brilliantly haunting. There is a sublime scene as the older Amy is confronted with her younger self. The same person she'd be condemning if she went with the Doctor. Karen Gillan is absolutely phenomenal in this scene. Due to Doctor Who time and causality, this moment becomes a memory of old Amy, because the bootstrap paradox makes it happen to her younger self. Amy knowing her older self is the one to leave, essentially creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts.
And that's why you refuse to help when it's your turn.
However, the core of the scene is the the emotion of it. The two Amys fondly reminiscing on memories of Rory. This is the turning point that changes older Amy's mind, because she realises how special and faithful Rory has always been, how they're soulmates.
I swore to protect you. I promised.
Younger Amy's speech about loving Rory is honestly amazing. Such a beautiful moment reflecting on the importance of the bond between a couple, something that has to go beyond simple looks. Amy in Series 5 was a complete train wreck. She constantly took Rory for granted, tried to cheat on him, and flirted with pretty much anyone she met. She was just an utterly unlikable disaster of a human being. However, Series 6 massively improves her as a character, and scenes like this reflect the strides the show took in how it presented her and Rory's relationship.
Rory's the most beautiful man I've ever met.
She has truly come to love and respect him, no longer taking him for granted. The Girl Who Waited isn't an episode that adds anything new to their relationship, or reveals anything we didn't already know. But what it does do is consolidate and drive these things home. It's more of what we saw in Curse of the Black Spot, where Amy is willing to do whatever it takes for Rory. That's why older Amy finally changes her decision and decides to help.
I'm gonna pull time apart for you.
The music in this sequence is utterly perfect, and the whole composition of the scene really chokes you up with the emotion of the moment. Is it a cliche power of love scene that would usually be cringe? Absolutely. But it's masterfully implemented, fitting so well into the narrative. After all, she's just a girl, he's just a boy. Could it be any more obvious?
It's not about what I'm doing, it's about who I'm doing it for.
However, immediately after this brave character decision of older Amy choosing to forsake the laws of time and sacrifice herself, she suddenly turns around and asks if she can go too. I like this twist, but it comes too soon after that emotional scene. It would work better if it came a bit later, revealing that she was never intending to let herself die, undercutting the two Amy scene in a much more dramatically fulfilling and satisfying way. As it stands, it's way too close to what seemed to be a sacrifice, so it doesn't maintain the effectiveness of that scene. But as I said, I do like the twist itself, adding further complications to the story. The Doctor knows two Amys can't be sustained. Well, unless it's a comedic minisode about Rory looking up her skirt. This is where the manipulative side of the 11th Doctor comes out to play. He can't admit it's impossible, because that would make it impossible to save the younger Amy, so he has to play along and manipulate older Amy. Under his cheery exterior, the 11th Doctor is very dark and manipulative, and scenes like this prove that very well, showing similarities to the 7th Doctor in a way. It's an absolutely fantastic direction to take the narrative, and it lays the groundwork for the perfect character-based climax. Rory and the two Amys are able to fiddle with quantum technobabble to reverse the polarity of the neutron flow, and intersplice the Hadron Collider with the Dyson Sphere to stabilise the timelines and unite the two Amys, who had played their part by reminiscing about the Macarena, because of course a song about a woman cheating on her partner is definitely right up Amy Pond's alley. But because the TARDIS cannot, in fact, sustain the two Amy paradox, it freaks out and there's a Chibnall-esque timer of 8 minutes for Rory to get back to the TARDIS before the whole universe explodes or something.
I'm not on my own. I've got my wives.
It has some good further drama to proceedings, especially as there's a bit of an ethical minefield of Rory treating the older Amy differently and asking her not to flirt with him despite her being his wife and the same Amy who was in the same room. It's an important thing to address, since we all have these kinds of unconscious biases and prejudices, just like Amy herself went through in The Almost People, where she refused to acknowledge both Doctors as equal beings. I do also like that there are comedic exchanges about what exactly they'll do with two Amys, since they can't really share a house and a marriage. Well, if Moffat was writing this, they definitely would, and they'd probably end up kicking Rory out. Good thing this wasn't a classic Grand Moff special then, eh?
This is how it all ends. Pond flirting with herself, true love at last.
One thing the climax reminds you of is how absolutely sublime the directing and cinematography are. Nick Hurren makes an immediate impact with his direction, and Owen McPollin's cinematography is just as high concept as his previous work on The 11th Hour, The Doctor's Wife and Night Terrors. The Girl Who Waited remains lines consistent with those, especially his signature overbearing lens flare. The whole story looks very slick and visually impressive, but the standout sequence from a directing and cinematography standpoint is the epic slow motion scene as Rory and his two wives race to the TARDIS, having to fight through the handbot swarm as they go. It's such a brilliant sequence and feels truly big budget even with the episode's monetary constraints. It looks absolutely gorgeous, especially in combination with Murray Gold's amazing soundtrack. Everything culminates as the Doctor slams the door in older Amy's face before she can get in. Like I mentioned earlier, he was manipulating her all along to ensure her cooperation, and the reveal of this deception is absolutely incredible. There's such a sinking feeling once you see how he looks at older Amy, full of guilt for what he's about to do, and I love Rory once again calling the Doctor out on it, since older Amy is very much real, no matter how much copium the Doctor inhales by saying she isn't. This single line speaks volumes.
This isn't fair. You're turning me into you.
The Doctor has so much guilt from their thousands of years of life that they can just live with it. They know how to bottle it up and ignore it. But Rory is a normal human being. He is still in touch with a wide spectrum of emotions, good and bad. So I like how he doesn't just let the Doctor get away with it at first, even if he does straight away afterwards. Rory is again put in this impossible situation, and the ending is truly magnificent. It was always obvious that the older Amy was gonna have to be left behind and get erased, but the scene confirming it is very touching and emotional. It is by far one of the saddest and most heartbreaking scenes in modern Doctor Who. Sure, younger Amy is there, but Rory still has to confront the death of his wife, and he's basically the executioner. Older Amy is the same person and her existence is just as valid as younger Amy, so it's hard to imagine the guilt and pain Rory must feel in this situation.
If you love me, don't let me in.
Amy is accepting her death. She's sacrificing herself properly this time. There's no way out and she knows it would be unfair to condemn her younger self to go through all of this. It's almost the perfect companion departure in a way. This brave sacrifice in the name of love. Amy looking out at Earth before she dies to the handbots. It's so tragic and bittersweet. Something you can only get with a piece of media like Doctor Who. This could genuinely be the final exit for a companion and it would work perfectly. It's by far one of the best scenes in the 11th Doctor era and it carries the episode to an extent, since it's the perfect note to end the narrative on and you kind of forget the journey to get there.
You're asking me to defy destiny, causality, the nexus of time itself for a boy.
The Girl Who Waited is an exceptional episode of Doctor Who. A very creative storyline with some absolutely brilliant concepts regarding time and exploring moral and ethical dilemmas. Visually, it's a truly gorgeous episode. Nick Curran's directing combining wonderfully with Owen McPollin's cinematography to form a high concept and slick episode that looks incredible despite having a lower budget than the others in Series 6. Karen Gillan is the standout performer with a phenomenal performance as both versions of Amy. The actor and the character are massively better here than they were in Series 5, marking a big improvement and allowing the heartbreaking storyline between Amy and Rory to truly shine. It consolidates their relationship and culminates in the perfect final scene for the pair. I do think that the episode is a little bit overrated, a bit too exposition heavy with a lot of stuff that doesn't get a satisfying explanation. Therefore it gets an A ranking on the Series 6 tier list. There's only a couple of things that hold it back, but on the whole it's a huge success. I would have liked a bit more of an exploration and explanation of the time streams, but the choice to focus on the human drama is definitely the right way to go. Arthur Darvill is brilliant, Rory having some incredible scenes with both the Doctor and Amy, serving as a good central focus of the story. The Girl Who Waited is a stellar episode of Doctor Who, so good it could almost be its own standalone movie. It's definitely a shining spot within Series 6 and I would always recommend watching it, even if the whole story could have been avoided if Amy had just asked which button to press. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my Diamond level patron Fallon Cortez and all my Gold level patrons Calvin, Daniel Shilato, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, and Luke_SY. Thank you so much for all the support.